All right, let's talk about a story that is just wild. We're going to dive into the mind of an investor who holds two absolutely mind-boggling records. One for the single biggest financial loss in history, and another for one of the greatest investment wins of all time. I mean, how does one person even do that? Let's get into it.
So let's start with the low point, and I mean a really low point. When the first dot-com bubble burst back in the early 2000s, the founder of SoftBank, Masayoshi Son, watched his personal net worth just evaporate by about $70 billion. No, that's not a typo. 70 billion. It is the most money any single person has ever lost in all of recorded history. For pretty much anyone else, that would be game over. But this is where the story gets crazy, because right around that same time, he took a $20 million chance on this tiny, unknown e-commerce startup in China. And that one single bet, well, it would eventually be worth an incredible $50 billion. And that company? Of course, it was Alibaba. So you have to ask, right? How does one person live on both ends of that spectrum, losing more than anyone in history, but also winning bigger than almost anyone in history? What's the mindset? What is the strategy that lets you not just survive that kind of whiplash, but actually use it to your advantage? That's what we're going to unpack.
To really get his strategy, you kind of have to get the guy. Son moved from Japan to the US when he was just a teenager. He ended up at UC Berkeley in the mid-70s, which, was basically ground zero for the personal computer revolution. He completely caught the bug, this idea that computers were about to change literally everything. So when he went back to Japan, he started SoftBank. And his career since then has been, well, a roller coaster is putting it mildly. He starts out by just dominating Japan's software market. Then, in 2000, he makes that now legendary $20 million bet on Alibaba. He gets completely wiped out in the dot-com crash, but he holds on. And then 14 years later, in 2014, Alibaba goes public, and that little bet becomes one of the greatest investments ever made. It's just an incredible story of seeing something no one else did and having the guts to stick with it.
Hindsight is 2020. It's so easy for us now to sit here and say, duh, of course you invest in Alibaba. But you have to understand, back then, Jack Ma's idea was not a slam dunk, not even close. In fact, to most investors, it sounded like a terrible, terrible idea. I mean, just to paint a picture for you, one author tells this story about a pitch meeting Jack Ma had with another investor. It was over pizza, and apparently it was so awkward and unconvincing that the investor's boss just kept telling stories about being scammed by other Chinese entrepreneurs. Ma looks like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world and barely even touched his food. It was a complete train wreck of a pitch.
So this is the real mystery, isn't it? The billion-dollar question. What on earth did Masayoshi Son see? How could he look at the exact same guy, the same pitch that other smart, experienced people laughed out of the room, and somehow see a future-defining opportunity? Well, the answer is in his whole philosophy. And that philosophy, that secret weapon, is a powerful framework you could call working backward from tomorrow. See, it's not about predicting the future. It's about having a vision for it and then building towards it. Okay, so here's the core of it. Son isn't just out there looking for good companies or hot trends. He spends a massive amount of his time researching and thinking, trying to form a really detailed, high-resolution picture of what the world will actually be like in 30 years. And then, and this is the crucial part, he goes out and invests in the companies that are building the essential pieces of that specific future.
Let's make this real. Let's look at a more modern example from SoftBank's Big Vision Fund to see how this actually works. The company is called Plenty. So, Plenty is a vertical farming company. Imagine this pitch. They come in and say, look, the two biggest problems in agriculture are unpredictable weather and human labor. Plenty's idea is to solve both by growing produce indoors in giant vertical towers, using AI and robots, and building these farms right on the outskirts of major cities. It's a pretty cool idea, right? But here is why Son opened the checkbook. It wasn't just a clever pitch. The idea of automated, sustainable local food production, it was a perfect puzzle piece for the detailed blueprint he had already built for the world of 2050. See, Plenty wasn't just a random company. It was a necessary component for the future he had already mapped out.
So how in the world do you take a massive 30-year vision and actually make it something you can act on today? Well, it's a surprisingly simple, structured process. It really is like planning a giant road trip. You start with your final destination. That's your 30-year vision. Okay, so to get there, what major city do you need to pass through at the halfway mark?
That's your 15-year goal. Then you figure out the states you need to cross before that. Those are your 10 and 5-year goals. And once you have all that, you can figure out which highway you need to get on right now. Suddenly, this giant, overwhelming vision becomes a single, clear, actionable step for next year.
But here's the thing. A grand 30-year plan is completely useless if you go bankrupt in year 2. And as that $70 billion loss shows, Son knows this better than anyone. This is where his huge, long-term vision meets very real, short-term pragmatism.
Son has this little saying he uses with his team all the time. It's simple. If it's raining, open an umbrella. It sounds almost comically obvious, but what he means is profound. You have to react to the reality of what's happening right now, immediately and without hesitation.
So what does that look like in the real world? It means you throw out those old-school, rigid annual budgets. If a company is burning through cash, you don't wait for a quarterly review. You cut costs decisively today. The whole point is to make sure the company survives the short-term storms so it can live to see the long-term vision become reality.
Okay, so what's the big takeaway for those of us who aren't investing billions of dollars? Well, this core idea is actually something any of us can use, and it's incredibly powerful.
Think about it. Most businesses, most people are obsessed with keeping their current customers happy. They focus on solving today's problems. That's the standard approach. The Son's approach completely flips that on its head. It's about focusing on what your future customers are going to need and starting to solve tomorrow's problems today. You stop just reacting to the market. You start creating it.
And that right there is the secret sauce. That's the ultimate advantage. When you're focused on the problems of tomorrow, you put yourself in a position to build solutions for issues your competitors won't even recognize until it's way, way too late. So I'll just leave you with this question to chew on. This isn't about having a crystal ball or trying to predict the future. It's just a different way of thinking. So ask yourself, who is your customer going to be in 10 or 15 years? And what problem, a problem they might not even know they have yet, can you start working on for them right now?